Okay, there we go. So, the title of this webinar I chose kind of a little bit provocatively. Humanity's got 99 problems, but a lack of brains ain't one. I took this after one of Jay-Z's songs. You might know it. You might know it. There's a lot of issues that we as a global civilization today have to deal with, and I do mean have to. Um, And this second part, the lack of brains ain't one. What this means is we do have a lot of brain power, a lot of innovation power, but it's kind of not going in the right direction. We're constantly coming up with new, more effective ways to solve some problems, but it seems that all these ways of solving problems just cause new problems. And we have to ask ourselves what are the deeper dynamics that are actually causing these issues, and without addressing which, none of those technological solutions really have any chance of doing anything. Just shortly, very briefly, for those of you that were not familiar with each other yet, Ram Dushishkren is my name. For the last 5 years, I've been working exclusively on sustainability projects. So, helping businesses and other organizations transition into more, let's say, environmentally and socially sustainable ways of doing business. Before that, I was more or less in the technology and science space. And throughout all of that, one thing became really apparent to me, and this is that we are really not addressing the right issues at all. And as I said, many of these technological fixes actually lead to more problems than they solve. So this is why I'm putting really a lot of focus now on addressing these underlying dynamics and on finding ways and collaborations where we can actually push this forward. And let's jump directly in with quite a deep question. How would you define the most important challenge we as a civilization should work on in our time? I think this is a very relevant and important question we can ask ourselves. And I will open breakout rooms now. I'll put you into three groups. So there will be 3 to 4 people. No, yeah, around 3 people in a group, and I'll give you 3 minutes to just briefly open up and discuss what do you think is how do you even define this most important challenge that we as a civilization today should work on. All clear? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I'm gonna open breakout rooms now, and after 3 minutes, I will let you know, and I'll just bring you back into the main room. Okay, welcome back. How did it go?
That was quick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it was.
quick, yes, I agree.
It was. There will be more time at the end of the webinar. We will revisit the same exercise. This was kind of just for the introduction to get the thinking going and to meet each other a little bit. So we'll get back to this question at the end of the webinar. For now, let's continue on. Our progress towards solving some of the most meaningful challenges of today, like health issues, environmental destruction, pollution, um, social disintegration, looks a little bit like this baby on this image. We're making some goals, we're designing new models, new technologies, but there seems to be some force that just constantly dragging us down. We have more renewable energy sources, but yet the emissions keep going up. We have more ecological food, regenerative farming practices, but still the use of pesticides globally is going up, and so on and so on. So something fundamental is missing there. And I've seen a lot of these kind of conflicting forces in my work with client, and I will give you a few examples. One example is we were doing a strategy for sustainable tourism with one of the clients, and they had goals they wanted to reach. And one of the goals was that in the next 3 years, they would like to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide for 25% per customer. But then the other goal was they would like to grow the number of customers 10% per year. And even without doing sophisticated math, you can quite clearly see that these are two opposite forces, right? So in those 3 years, they will finish up with exactly the same level of carbon dioxide emissions. There's another case. I worked with a plastics company, and they were opening up a new line for processing recycled plastic. And I somewhat proactively, even though I knew what the answer was gonna be, but I asked the CEO, so how much can we expect your use of virgin plastics to be reduced because of this new additional line for recycled plastics? So basically, will this recycled plastic actually replace the virgin plastics? And he said, well, no, we're just diversifying our portfolio. We're still going to grow the other lines as well. So again, we have this same thing where, we're coming up with these nice innovations and marketing stories about how we're adding more renewables, how we're adding more ecological products and so on. But that does nothing to diminish the actual the actual dirty ones and the ones that are making a lot of damage. So we just have one more participant joining. Hi, Taruna. Really nice to see you again. Hi, Taruna.
Hi, Ram.
Hey, nice for you to join. Nice to see you.
And you.
We have started already, so yeah, just join in.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. Sorry, Ram.
No problem. No problem. Yeah, and we can really see this on the global level. In the case of energy, for example. This is one chart that I like to show very much because it's a very good showcase of what's going on. When we hear people say that the share of renewable electricity is going up, that we're adding more and more solar panels every year and so on, that might sound great until you look at the chart where you see that throughout history, every addition of a new energy source did nothing to diminish the previous sources, and this is happening again. So while we're adding more so-called clean energy sources, we're not diminishing the dirty ones at all, right? So there's something at play here that's just not right. And if we don't address that, we can just see that every technological innovation does nothing to really repair the damage. So I really like the analogy of fungus and mycelium. Those of you who know a thing or two about fungi know that the majority of the organism lies underground. So the part that comes out, the mushroom, is just one very small part. And we're seeing these mushrooms pop up, right? We have pollution, we have health issues, we have carbon dioxide emissions, we have toxicity, we have all these, the way people call them, externalities that are happening because of our economic progress. But there's this system underneath that is really causing them. And if we just cut out one of the mushroom, let's say, even if we manage to bring down carbon emissions, the system is still there and it's still the same, and those mushrooms will just keep popping in other places. And until we actually get rid of this mycelium that is causing these mushrooms to pop up, then we're just caught in this endless loop of racing to remedy these symptoms without really solving anything substantial. And the reason I started focusing more on this and also talking about this, like in this webinar, is because I see all across the board that people just do not realize how deep the changes that are existentially needed have to be. This depth of changes is really profound, and if we don't talk about it and just keep solving these superficial problems, things are gonna go bad. So we need to start really, really seriously discussing this. And to start discussing this, let's start with something that is quite familiar to all of us. So our internal metabolism and reward circuits. Can you please write in the chat what is your favorite sweet? What would be your favorite sweet? Chocolate. Okay, you can't miss with that. Brigitta, yes. Anybody else? Choco. What's a speculous?
Ishkot.
Speculous is basically it's a spread type of thing. It works as but I think it is the foundation for the cookies also.
Okay.
So I think it's the same ingredients, and then either cookies or a spread is made. And I'm a huge fan of the spread.
Good. So why are we talking about sweets? Let me ask you a question. Why do you think so many people have such trouble giving up sugar? Why is it so difficult to resist? You can just say it out loud.
Instant gratification.
It's a drug, addiction.
It's an instant gratification. So it's instant. It's instant. It's instant. So
yeah. So we have inside of our bodies and mind these reward circuits, right? That give us this feeling of pleasure, of reward when we do something. And typically in our history, stuff like sugar, salt, fat, these were quite difficult things to find. So our whole system is designed to seek more and more and exploit as much as it can of these things. And that's why all the food that contains a lot of these things, like fast food and sweets, are addictive, right? So we have these reward circuits within us that give us a good feeling when we get this thing. And that's why we want more and more. And in the world, well, where there are limits, so where these things are scarce, this makes total sense. Every drop of sugar was very valuable in history. But once we start making up more effective ways of getting that thing, this can become toxic. And this brings us to the main point, which is when the system is designed to seek more and more of something, designing more efficient ways of getting that thing will lead to addiction and imbalance in the system. We can think of a cake or a chocolate or any piece of sweet as a very efficient sugar intake. So we have taken, I don't know, our body's sugar needs for the whole year and packed it into one single sweet. So you can think of this as kind of a very efficient technology, right? Does that mean that a person is going to eat one piece of cake and say, okay, I'm good for this year, I don't need any more? Of course not, right?
No, sure there is. If we're on the 30th of December, then yeah, I'm in for it.
Of course, that lasts until the first week of January. Yeah. So of course not, right? Our whole reward mechanism is made to seek more and more and to exploit as much as it can. And that's the same reason why you cannot help a person who's struggling with alcoholism by offering them a stronger drink and saying, okay, if you're gonna drink a stronger drink, then you're gonna drink less. Or telling your boss that you finished your week's work by Wednesday and expecting that you're just gonna get Thursday and Friday off. Of course not. You're gonna just get more work, right?
Depends on the boss, Ram.
Depends on the boss. If you have a very, very good boss, that might be the case. Yeah. So this is very important, right? And I will just stress it again. If a system is designed to seek more and more of something, designing more efficient ways of getting that thing will lead to addiction and imbalance in the system. And here's the same thing with more color to really hit it on the nail. This is a really important thing. Christian, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. It's about Jevons paradox also, right? If you guys are not familiar with it, that
you see in the future.
you see. Sorry. Then go ahead, please.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you. So yeah, this is exactly the point. Just like our bodies have a metabolism, our whole society and economy has a metabolism as well. So our economy is taking things from the environment, stuff, energy, and transforming them into products and services that can be sold for a profit. And this is the same way of transformation, like we're transforming nutrients in our bodies. And that's why it's very weird that people are betting on efficiency and addition of better, more efficient sources to lead to a sustainable economy, right? It's the same nonsense like saying that by making a more addictive food, we're going to eat less. It applies to the economy as well. So whenever people say that we just need more efficient technology and we're gonna solve all the problems, that is one big pile of nonsense. And it just shows the basic misunderstanding of the market forces that are beneath this. And yes, Christian, as you very well predicted, in economics, that's called the Jevons paradox. Jevons was an economist of 19th century England. And in that time, there was a debate around coal. So people were getting afraid that the amount of coal was limited, right? And coal was the thing that was fueling industrial revolution. So they started thinking, how could we design more efficient machines to use less coal, right? And he was the first one that noticed that, in fact, by increasing efficiency, they did not use less coal, they used more coal, which makes total sense. And if you think about it, throughout our history, we have year by year been designing more efficient technologies, but in every year we have just used up more of the Earth's resources than the previous year. So obviously it doesn't work that way. So there are many ways in which Jevons paradox comes to work. So one way is by simply, supply and demand equation. So when things become cheaper, like when a resource, energy, or whatever other resource becomes cheaper, you're just gonna have more demand for it, right? That's a simple economic logic. But then also you have other things. For example, when resources become cheaper and more easy to exploit, that means that whole new market segments can open up. So market segments that until then weren't profitable can now become profitable. And somebody will come and exploit that market segment. So by let's say having cheaper energy and more accessible resources, you're actually expanding the market. And it ends up using more of those resources. And there's also a thing of perception. So it also changes the perception of the resource. For example, when it becomes cheaper, it also becomes less valuable in our minds. And again, this brings us back to this chart where we can see that all the addition of renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and other things did nothing to diminish the previous energy sources, right? Because the market is just expanding. You pump in more energy into the system and the market says, well, great, we're not going to reduce the other energy sources. We're just going to use up more of the energy. Another thing is plastics, for example. Nowadays, we know it's a big problem in the environment, but in fact, plastic bags were introduced as a sustainable alternative to paper bags back in the 60s. And the logic was, of course, the material is more durable, it doesn't tear, it doesn't get wet and degrade, and so on. So it's a much more durable, sustainable material. Well, of course. But then plastics get insanely cheap. Economies of scale mean that it can be produced in much bigger quantities at a much lower price. And the value of such a plastic bags in the eyes of consumers just drops down, right? So it's this perception of what really is valuable and what's not valuable and can be discarded and just used once. So all of these are examples of how this Jevons paradox can work. And it always leads to bigger consumption, bigger exploitation, and bigger destruction. And then, of course, the important question is, what makes our system work like this? Why is it like this? This is a really interesting question to dive into. And of course, we cannot look past the financial system. But before that, let's just mention one thing. And this is that it's the first time in our known history that we are in such a situation. The situation of overexploiting the environment is not new. So there have been civilizations in the past that have overexploited their environment, that have got into wars over resources, that have disintegrated because of internal social issues and so on. But all of them were local civilizations. So none of them really had the power to cause destruction on a global level. For the first time in history, we are one global civilization, and we have nowhere to relocate unless you buy into Musk's ideas of colonizing Mars, of course. But it's actually we have nowhere to transfer. There's no maneuver space for saying, okay, we can screw this up and then just restart somewhere else. Whatever destruction happens as a result of this current economy is going to be the destruction that impacts the entire planet and the entire global society. And also, from this point of view, it doesn't make sense anymore to talk about individual footprints of individuals or companies or countries or continents, because most of the products that we use and that our jobs depend on are made across the world, are made on all continents. And saying that we can just independently solve something here doesn't work anymore. So it actually requires this holistic approach and picture of our society as one global society, because we are in that position now. Okay, so back to financial system. Remember when I said that most people don't realize how deep the changes need to go. Here we're just going to touch upon the kind of economic aspect of this. Of course, there are cultural aspects, spiritual aspects, if you will, kind of individual aspects. But in terms of the system that's driving this destruction, we need to talk about finance. And in particular, we need to talk about interest-based finance. So the concept that you can give money and get more money back, right? So this includes bank loans, this includes investments that have return on investment, and so on. So wherever you're putting in money and getting more money back, that creates this dynamic. So what happens, right? For example, let's take a bank loan. Let's say I take out a bank loan, and bank gives me money, and I have to repay that money with interest. So in a number of years, I'm going to have to pay back more. The money that bank gives me, the principal, it goes straight into the economy, right? So it gets circulated in the economy, while the interest doesn't. So that means that I have to pull out more money from the economy that I put in. And there are only two ways in which that can play out. In way one, saying that you have this finite fixed pool of money and all the people that are taking loans have to take out more than they put in, that just leads to conflict and inequality. And the other scenario, of course, is economic growth. So you have to grow in order to assure this constant addition of more money to the economy. And of course, people don't really want the first one, although it is also happening as a consequence of this. But this is something that that people want to avoid, of course. And by the way, after the world wars, economic growth kind of became this way of avoiding conflict. Although it caused a lot of conflicts, but it avoided a global conflict, such as the two world wars. Because people realize that if you have economic growth, then you can basically curb a little bit this war for resources and keep people, let's say, moderately happy with the state as it is now. But of course, economic growth is also bumping into limits. So let's explore those limits. So we've seen that there's this obligation for growth in our financial system. So if you don't want a direct collapse, then it needs to constantly keep growing. But what is this growth really dependent on? So in other words, what do we monetize in the economy? One thing is matter. So living and non-living matter. This includes all the materials, all the food that we eat, everything material in the economy that you can pack into products that you can sell. Yeah. The second thing is energy. So energy fuels the economy, energy gets monetized in the economy. And then there's the third thing, which is our attention and time. Right? Economy runs on labor, so people putting their energy and time into doing something, and also gets monetized on people's attention, like in social media, like in Netflix, in all sorts of content, where you sell to a person something that requires their attention. And these are basically the three things that economy is based on, and all these three things have their limits. Of course, matter has limits. There's not an infinite amount of matter, and even renewable matter is limited by the regeneration rate. Of course, energy is also limited. We can only use energy from the sun or energy that is already contained in the earth. All the other energy sources are simply derivations of that. And it's of course limited. There's a limited storage of energy, and also harvesting energy from like sun and derived sources requires materials. And then
Okay, you have not only matter, you have also services. So these are maybe
yes, and this requires attention and time. Right?
yes, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be matter and service maybe. Okay, doesn't matter.
Yeah, services is basically just selling your time. If you're a hairdresser,
in a way, yes.
Yeah, if you're a hairdresser, if you're a yoga teacher, whatever you are, you're selling your time, and nobody has more than 24 hours in a day. Right? So yeah, matter, energy, and attention and time. These are the three limits to economic growth. And now let's take a little journey through different scenarios that people suggest as kind of a way towards sustainable economy. One of those things is just having circular material loops, right? So keeping materials in a circular flow through the economy, and in that way you reduce the extraction of resources, and you reduce the production of waste. And yes, of course, this is a way that everything in nature works, but in such a system based on economic growth, this cannot work without negative effects. So one thing is that, of course, recycling those resources inside the economy takes energy, time, or both. So, for example, in industrial recycling or remanufacturing processes, they're very energy heavy. Or if you want to repair, or if you want to, embed those services in the economy itself, you need people's time. So again, you're limited there. You can think of this circular loop as just speeding up with economic growth. So you cannot just overspeed, right? People cannot have so much material flowing through because it would either burn out on the energy side or on the attention and time side. Then the next.
Usually you can use the term capacity, which is a very good one because you have limited capacity of a system.
Yes.
And breaking that always creates these problems.
Exactly.
So, yeah, capacity is really, really good for explaining that part.
Exactly.
And we all understand it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the key point is whatever way we are proposing of, let's say, building a more sustainable economy, it cannot be based on economic growth. It's just incompatible. Some people will say, well, let's just transfer more into services, like Maida, you said, for example, right? We'll just build a service-based economy and it will be less dependent on energy, less dependent on materials and so on. And of course, then you bump into attention and time limits. And even with digital services, we can really see the really, really negative effects of that, where the entire economy is basically competing for people's attention. And that creates imperatives and incentives to exploit that attention in as addictive way as possible. Christian, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I would like to say that it's more, it's a matter of definition of growth. And Daja put a hint in the meeting chat, which is that something that Fritjof Capra came up with already, like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And that is the shift from a quantity growth to a quality growth. And then it makes sense again. This is the point where it is also for me my counter argument to degrowth. Also because from an organic view, degrowth does not exist. This is a concept that is completely artificial, okay? But we can have qualitative growth. So it's a matter of what do we define as growth, right? And that's a question of other nature.
May I humbly disagree, Christian?
Please go ahead. Love that. Please disagree.
It always depends on the environment, the capacity of the environment to carry the burden, right? So you can have degrowth, but it's usually because of the capacity of the environment being reduced, and you're forced into degrowth. But that's one of the nature's fundamental rules. So it's not something new. When your environment does not provide the means to grow, you will have degrowth as a consequence of the force of the environment. Usually it's not an internal force, but yeah.
I love the discussion. Can we move the discussion to the end of the webinar? We're gonna have time then, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what all of you guys have to say on this. So, yeah. These three things are the limits, and we were talking about services, right? Saying that we can just do more on the services part and reduce our reliance on matter and energy. And again, there's just so many yoga classes or hairdressing sessions or whatever that people can go to, right? So you have your limits on how much you can sell. And by trying to speed this up and make more economic growth out of it, you're just hijacking people's attention, hijacking people's time. And this is happening right now with shorter attention spans, with actual psychological issues because of social media and so on. This is just a consequence of monetizing people's attention. So even if you have such economic growth without increasing material and energy consumption, you're just going to burn people out. So in any case, this is a scenario that is terminating.
Okay, I didn't mean with attention. The slide before that this is the solution. I just was thinking that okay, you equated time and attention with service. Okay, this was just it. I didn't want to say that this is the solution.
Yeah, that's fine. And now the next question, when we understand that the growth in such a context that we have it now is not viable in the future, then the next question can be, how did we get trapped into it, and why are we trapped into it, and how can we get out of those traps? Because obviously it's difficult. If it wasn't difficult, we would have already escaped these traps. So why is this so difficult to get out of? And why do we constantly keep making the situation worse, even though there's a lot of awareness about it? There's a lot of action already happening. And I would say there are three main systemic traps at play here that we have to really be conscious of. One of them is the pattern of addiction. Like we talked about sugar, we have all sorts of addictions, right? But here we're talking about economic addiction. Basically, what addiction means is that by applying a solution to a problem, you're actually making that problem worse. So if you think about drug addiction or alcohol addiction, that person is, let's say, drinking alcohol to feel better at the moment, but in the longer term, it's causing more harm. And in the economy, right, economy is based on addiction, if you look at it. From the financial standpoint, we are solving our debt by applying further debt, right? So we are making the economy grow by adding more and more debt to the economy. And that creates this addiction pattern where if you break it, it collapses, really. So you are very compelled to just continue adding more debt and adding more growth, because in that way you avoid a collapse, but you're racing towards a problem that is much bigger than this. And also on the other side of the economy, economy is really making people addicted, right? Because addiction is good for business. The whole social media is based on addiction. The whole fast food is based on addiction. All sorts of industries are really based on having addicted customers that keep buying your products. And while we keep applying such solutions and packing them into, how we're going to make a new market solution technology that solves a problem, we're just propagating this addiction pattern. So this is one of the traps.
Ram, do you like people putting likes to your posts?
Well,
right, you post something on social media and people like that, right?
Who doesn't like that? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a clear example of basically positive feedback loop addiction.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Then the second toxic pattern, I would say, is competition. And the reason there's this nuclear rocket here is because this is very much like the Cold War of the previous century. So the arms race. And that's a good case to explain this kind of a systemic dynamic because it's very clear. You had two forces, right? And both felt the other one as a threat. So one increases their arsenal, their military power, the other one sees that as a threat. And in response, the other one increases their military power. And now the first one again sees that as a threat and increases their military power. And this again compels the second one to increase, and so on. And this creates this arms race that ends up in a really high risk scenario that nobody really wants. So nobody really wants to have a situation where one crazy person can push a button and destroy the entire world. But this is exactly the situation that happened. And you can see here that the way out of this is never more technology. So more technology in this case, so more military power, was actually the driving force of this kind of a dynamic. And the way out, as it ultimately happened to some degree, is an actual agreement. So a recognition that this pattern is leading to a very, very bad place, and that both parties need to agree that they will assure mutual collaboration, because the consequences otherwise are catastrophic. And the same dynamic is present in the economy, in the way the economy works. So we have a global economy with all the companies that are competing for customers, and all of them are trying to outdo each other, right? So all of them are trying to come up with better technologies and outcompete the other ones, and that compels them to exploit the environment more, to exploit the people more, right? So this is a toxic kind of pattern that inevitably leads to overexploitation, but no one player can really escape it. And if you look at, for example, the way Europe is kind of economically destroying itself, it is a symptom of this, right? So if just one of the players tries to reduce exploitation a little bit and get out of it, then the others just outcompete them economically and destroy them economically, right? So there's this kind of a Mexican standoff situation of all the global players that is causing this dynamic. And again, like in the case of Cold War, it cannot be escaped by one single player. It has to be a collaborative decision, because if just one person or one company or one nation backs out, it just becomes vulnerable to exploitation of the other countries that don't decide to step out. And this is so a very interesting pattern and an interesting, let's say, it's interesting to think about ways how this can be escaped, and also how, companies, nations can actually lead by example to get these kinds of agreements done. And then the third pattern, the third kind of trap, is the tragedy of the commons. So the commons are everything that we all rely on, right? In this case, I've put here pasture land full of cows, because this was the first kind of scenario that this was researched on. This is also quite an old thing that economists realized. But so the case here is that you have this common, right? For example, grazing land, or let's say the atmosphere, or water supply, or everything that we depend on. And this is some resource that everybody can exploit. And in a kind of market dynamic, let's say you have multiple farmers that want their cows to graze this land. Each one of the farmers is compelled to add more cows, right? Because they have immediate benefit from adding one more cow to graze the land. They have more milk, they have more economic power, and so on. But of course, all the players, all the farmers are reaching the same conclusion. For each one of them, adding that one cow is very beneficial in the short term, while the damage that this one extra cow causes is socialized to all of them. So it's, in a relative sense speaking, quite small. But when you add up together all the contributions of all of them, it leads to overexploitation and, at the end, destruction of the common. And this is happening with all the commons that we have. So, for example, atmosphere is one of the examples, right? For me, driving from one place to the other in my car is a big benefit because I get to do what I wanted to do, while the damage I cause by, exhaust gases from the car are almost negligible in terms of the entire atmosphere. But when the entire society runs on that same assumption, then we get a situation where we are completely destroying the atmosphere and making it unhealthy, right? So is this asymmetry that is the trap? Asymmetry between the personal gain that we have in the short term and the socialized cost that we cause in the long term. So this is the third trap that we have to get out of. And again, there are no technology or market solutions to come out of this trap. The solution is always some sort of a system of a social contract that binds this common. So if we just leave it up to the market, it's just going to get destroyed for sure. And the ways out of all these three traps are non-technological and non-market based. And I think for everybody that's working in a company that's working on innovations, on solutions, this is important to realize that we cannot solve these deeper problems with technology. And technology is the easy part, really. Some engineers might say, well, no, it's difficult to innovate and to come up with new technologies, but you're swimming with the current. Technology has return on investment put on it. Technology is something that it's happening anyways, right, in the economy. And this is the easy part. The very difficult part is binding that technology to some sort of a social agreement, or deciding that some technology is just too risky. And even though it might have positive aspects, it also has a very dangerous aspect. And deciding that we are not going to go through with the development of some technology. That's the difficult part. And so saying that just by putting more money into solar panels or more money into bio-based materials or more money into, I don't know, repair shops, that just, it's not going to work. It's not enough. So it's necessary that we create this space for actual agreement and for binding of those technologies to some sort of a social agreement. So based on all this, we can look at a few myths that are very popular in the space of sustainability and solving these kind of challenges. One of them, a very common one, is that solutions to our global challenges are an opportunity for economic growth. I cannot tell you how many people in my field, consultants on sustainability and all sorts of business people, are still propagating this story that sustainability is the next business opportunity, that it's an opportunity for companies to be innovative and so on. It's not. By definition, a sustainable economy cannot run as fast as the current economy. I mean, that's the definition of sustainability. It's reaching a sustainable kind of level. Now, of course, as Christian mentioned earlier, there is growth in other directions, in quality, in our personal growth and so on. But for example, we can equate this with our growth. So at some point we stop growing physically, right? We just don't grow forever. And then we start developing internally and becoming more wise, becoming more knowledgeable, having more impact on people around us and so on. But this is a different type of growth, and it cannot be fueled by finance. This is no longer a financial growth. And this is the important thing to realize. So the economic financial growth is inevitable to go down. That's just not a question. Then the second myth, that we just need more investment into clean and so-called ethical technologies. Again, based on what we talked about, we can with high confidence say that this is not at all the case. We have been investing into clean technologies for a long time, and we just are not getting the results, right? So, or if we are getting the results, they are very narrow. So we are solving one particular problem, but then based on that, we're causing 10 more problems that end up being very toxic. And for example, if we look at energy transition and renewable energy sources, even if we do manage to miraculously cut down CO2 emissions, then I can guarantee that in 10 years, we're going to be talking about toxicity. We're going to be talking about exploitations of the supply chains, about unethical mining practices, and so on. So this would just be transferring one problem to the other. So this is an infinite loop, and we need much more than just investment into clean and ethical technologies. Clean technologies are actually the minority part, but unfortunately, because the technological development is driven by the market, it's where the most attention goes, and it's the easiest part. So it's very easy for people to say, well, I cannot change the system, but I can at least work on something. And then everybody reaches that conclusion, and everybody just starts, selling solar panels and, working on these kinds of solutions, but the real problem doesn't get addressed. So this myth is also not the case. There's another common kind of argument that I hear, which is the market will balance things out. There's this idea that at first in the market dynamic, you will get more exploitation, but then after some time, people realize that this is leading to bad things and to toxic outcomes and so on. And then kind of the market spontaneously shifts to remedy the damage that it has done. And again, we can see that this may work on a very limited scope in very limited cases, but on the global case, it has no way of working because you simply bump into one of those three limits. And also, usually, the moment when the market realizes things are going bad, it's already way too late. So, for example, if we look at climate change, at the moment where the economic damage from climate change will become so substantial that it will actually drive the market to respond, it will be way too late. So absolutely, the market has no way of balancing things out. And then the third one, which I think is interesting, it's let's just keep our personal footprints low. So the most one individual can do is take care of their personal footprint and buy local food and so on, and that will just be enough. Of course, that's an important part of it, that we all, that we simply don't buy into the systems that are causing harm. That's a no-brainer, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough, because we're simply in a situation where if we get out of the game, other players will just take our spot. And there's no way really to go. There's no way to move away from this kind of system. So this, I think, even though it's very necessary to work on our personal lives and lifestyles, it's a dangerous statement to make, because it makes you feel that you're doing what's in your best power. And we really need to be proactive, because the system is running its course and it needs to be changed. So this is also not enough. And to conclude, we're slowly reaching the finish line here. And I'm coming back to this image of this baby because I often hear that we are making baby steps, right? That we're far away from a systemic change, but at least we're making some steps. You know, we're making it more efficient here, and we're planting a tree there, and we're using a little bit of recycled stuff here, and so on. And to that, I always say, yes, baby steps are fine, but avoiding the real problem and working on things that are easy is not a baby step. That's ignorance. And I think this is a really important distinction. So by just going with the easy stuff and say, well, the system is too difficult to change, you're not making baby steps in the right direction. You're just dancing around, but avoiding the real problem. And I think this is a dangerous mindset because it just makes you feel good with what you're doing, but you're not really proactively changing the situation. So this particularly pertains to everybody that's working in some sort of a technological development of some solutions that are just solving these symptoms and making something more efficient or building a new business model, but not really addressing the deeper issues that we discussed here. So what can we as individuals really do? Yesterday, I had a very similar lecture like this, and this was the question I got. So what can I as an individual really do here? And I think this is a really important and good question. And here I will just give my few cents on this question. So definitely, yes, on the personal level, I think there's a lot we can do. So this is a no-brainer, like taking care of your lifestyle, your health, making decisions that are more sustainable, so buying local stuff and eating healthy ecological food and so on, and also keeping some personal discipline. So in that sense, I mean, being resilient to these addictions that the whole economic environment is kind of forcing you into, right? If we don't have this discipline on an individual level, we cannot have it on the society level, right? So being able to not get into these short-term dopamine boosts and so on, but take care of our long-term well-being of us and our local societies. So that's definitely a no-brainer what we can do. The second thing, which I think is important, is working to become more independent of the economy and live well with less money. So the economy is going down, that's for certain, one way or another. If it happens in 10 years or if it happens in 30 years, doesn't matter, but it is going down because we are approaching very fast, very dangerous limits. So this is an inevitable thing. And if we look at what an economy of the future might look like based on the thing that we cannot have interest in the economy, we cannot have such a financial system. So how will this economy or society even look like? Well, definitely it will look like less money being circulated and less dependence on trade. There's just no way that it can be otherwise. So learning to become more independent of the economy and live well with less money, I think, is definitely a necessity. Refusing to buy into things that oppose your values. This is, of course, if somebody is working a job just because it's easy, not because it actually resonates with their values, I think this is definitely one improvement they can make. And learn. I think learning is really one of the most powerful things we can do. So learning about why things are the way they are, how we came to this point, how it works, and what are the possible ways forward. And also really trying hard to understand other perspectives, because none of us including what I'm saying right now, is the whole truth. And there is merit in every perspective. Even if it sounds stupid to you, there is some ground that people are basing their perspectives on. And one trick I find really valuable here is to read stuff I disagree with, and really try to understand why that person thinks the way they do, right? And in that way, you can really learn a lot. All of this is needed, but not sufficient. So we were talking about these kind of personal choices, personal responsibility, and this is absolutely needed, but it's not sufficient, because even if we if we move somewhere to a ecological remote village and live in a completely regenerative way, toxicity is everywhere. Toxicity is in the air, it's in the ground, it's in the rainwater. Climate change will affect every place on Earth, right? And global conflicts and migration and all the sort of social things that are following these issues are gonna happen everywhere. So even if we go somewhere and take care that we live in a way that we want to live, we are not doing enough, because the trouble is gonna catch on, and our environment will become toxic as well, or we will be on the way of some military force or something that will just erase us. So we definitely need to proactively also engage in the systemic change. And there are two things I would mention here. One is, let's not dissociate from the heaviness of this. I think very often we kind of say, okay, things are the way they are, it's all fucked up, I'll just take care that I'm okay, and in a way I will dissociate from all the bad things that are happening, and I will live in my happy little world. I think it's important that we allow ourselves to really feel the heaviness of this, to really empathize with all the beings that are being in trouble because of this, because only from that space can we really feel enough imperative to contribute to solving that. While if we dissociate from that and avoid feeling this really heavy stuff, then I think we simply don't have the drive to do something about it. And the second thing, in whatever space you are, socially and professionally, find leverage to influence this system. So particularly the financial system and the economic system through your work or other engagements. I think these two are a very important addition to the kind of personal side of what we can do. Okay. We have come to the end of kind of this presentation part of this webinar. And at this point, I would like to revisit this group discussion. And maybe we can do it here in the plenary kind of sense, without breakout groups. So based on what I talked about, how do you see this first question now after hearing this? So how would you define the most important challenge we as a civilization should work on in our time? This is now an open question to you.
Is it about us, or is it about the environment we live in? But because this is important. Usually the most important question for us is us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this is the case, I think how to survive.
But can we survive without an environment?
Well, if you ask Elon Musk, yes.
Yes, of course.
Because he's a linear thinking idiot, but that's the point. Sorry, not to be over judgmentally. Yeah. No, but may I say something also about like frameworks that we
Yes,
can
please.
work here to, well, we can all come up and each of us will have like favorite leverage points or favorite, or let's say like we each, depending on our background and our situation, see different challenges or roadblocks for our civilization, right? And I love to work with a framework that's called the 9 Universal Roadblocks, the NUR model, and that defines actually well, two overarching roadblocks, which is lack of impact and fragmentation that you see everywhere. And that is actually, you can look, if you propose any type of solution, you will always have to address both at the same time, lack of impact and fragmentation to really move the needle, right? And I could go through the 9 now. I don't do it. I spare you. I don't talk too much then. But there is, you can actually, every one of us can come up with something, and I can put it into these 9 areas, these 9 roadblocks, right? So, and the question is now how to do it. Now what is the question that comes from there?
Can you share some of the links to the framework?
Yeah, I can share, for example, can I make a screen share here? Is that possible?
Can you try? I don't know if it's
Yes, let's see if I can do this share. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
You see. So I need to go here, share. Actually, I don't know if I can actually put this on presentation mode, but I think you should see it, right? Can you see it? Is
Yes,
it
we see
okay?
it, we
Is it?
see it. Yes.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
I can put this off here. So, common frame of reference. What are the lessons learned? Because we tend to not learn lessons from what happened. Look just at the pandemics. What happened during COVID? We learned zero from it. Zero. There's no things applied. Lesson learned. Policy versus practice. We know it. You know, policies are crazy, dysfunctional. If you work in the field, you know it. You know that the policies are not meeting the reality. We have fragmentation again here. Risk versus response versus consequences. The different phases of like emergency management and catastrophe management. Pre-impact versus post-impact, universal motivators, return of investment. That is a big question that I also wrap my head around. Like, how do we actually get capital to be interested in finding approaches that address that? And the question, how good is good enough? You know, like, so do we define, how do we define what's really good enough instead of just trying more and more for something that is the last 5% or so that is not even relevant? Yeah, and again, so this is actually from DM Network, and it's called 9 Universal Roadblock Model, and I could, of course, go deeper into it, but you can make a research also and find material.
That's very nice. Thanks, Christian. Does anybody else have anything to share regarding the question?
I would like maybe just
Yes,
just to have a couple of replicas. How do I see all these things? All the things that are happening today on the external level and on the internal level, like where you said that whenever the value of something is drops, it becomes cheaper, and in a human mind, the value drops, like with plastic bags, or more opportunities like in Industrial Revolution or in any example of this time. More efficient the machine doesn't mean that the coal is used less. It is used more because of the greed within the human nature. So all this brings me back to actually to human mind and human, if you want, development of maturity, which can be, it should shift human mind from being merely intellectual and to some kind of intelligence which is more of a group consciousness this is what you probably call something like being universal, or being in your thinking, being aware of what it means for the group. It could be very isolated group, or universally for the whole planet. So I think that we more and more are realizing what is being told maybe millennia ago, or even in 20th century, think globally and act locally, because the answer is that those matter are to be used locally, and we can share our attention, our time, our services maybe globally, but when we approach matter, we should somehow focus on local. In that way, we reduce many things, many aspects of pollution. So I think that thinking about pollution and thinking about toxicity, it is above everything toxicity of our mental field, of global mental field. This toxicity stems from fierce individuality, which is now in transition within some people to something else. And I agree with Christian that in order to not to avoid problem, to all the time being aware of the hard things, yes, it means that you have to say yes to grief, to grief and to many unpleasant states of mind. It actually it actually is something that is individual growth and collaborating decision. I agree with that. This is our only way out. But this collaborating decisions could be made only with such mature people who are saying yes to self-limitation, to feeling grief because of someone else, and so on and so on.
Perfect. Thank you. Igor.
Thank you. Thank you, Bilena. I must agree with you. Now, I was thinking about, the emergence of governance and how governance should be designed. And usually you get governance when the situation is dire. When you decide that you will drop your personal, individual, national perks because you need to be governed on a higher level. And frankly, we have a kind of a governance, United Nations, which is trying to do something, but I think the model of that is strange, because most of us agreed that democracy is one of the ways how to govern, right? It's being degraded, yes. But if we look at for instance, United Nations, we don't have that. We don't have this democracy. We have this parliamentary, somebody sends representatives there. So we don't have the democracy on the global level, and our problems are global. And if you look at Europe, if Europe is the only country, the only place in the world that says, okay, let's try to be sustainable, what does that mean for Europe? We will stand behind, because everybody else will just use the natural resources which are still there, and then we'll have a problem. So basically, now we have this prisoner's dilemma.
Yes.
But it's a global one. And we are only talking about basically local or personal solutions. I do think that education is one of the things which is supposed to be there, because all people should be aware and actively participate.
Mm.
But it should not only be from bottom up, it should also be from top down. And frankly, how does a democracy emerge? It emerges through the force of people. They say, we don't want to have another tyrant, another dictator, another whatever it is, but say, no, we want to participate. And this is cookies of two things. One of them is education, empowering people, each and every of us. And the other thing, we should not forget that as a person, we have really, really limited power. But if the governance is there, then yes, that might be a way to a solution, but it will not be easy. It will not be nice.
Yes.
Can I just add
In
something?
every case, I think, yes, Nika, of course,
Because
just to finish the sentence. Yeah, in any case, I think we have to brace for some impact, right? It will happen in either scenario. And I think to maybe double down on what you said, Igor, a way out of these challenges that are caused by these multipolar traps would be a central kind of world government, but then nobody really wants that, right? Because that's very corruptible. That can very easily turn into kind of a global dystopic scenario, right?
So basically, we need to establish mechanisms for that not to happen. And you can see the democracy on a national level is deteriorating. It went relatively well for a few decades, and now we can see all over the place, just being degraded.
Yeah.
And this is something that should be done on a systemic level. I'm sorry to say that, but that's system thinking should be applied when you have systemic problems.
Yeah. Nika, let's take your point of view, and then we're gonna wrap up because we reached 11:30, and that was the time frame of the webinar. So Nika.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that we are up. I mean, these discussions are usually the best part of all these webinars and all these things. So, there should be more space and time dedicated to discussions. It's just, I think it's what came up during the conversations and listening, especially now to that last little bit by Igor, is we do have we do have organizations on a global level that just don't have the power for reasons which are known and unknown. And I don't know how many of you have followed the COP this year. How many of you have been actively engaged in the discussions? I mean, it's a global event. It was taking place recently. I don't know how many of you are following the research that's being published for the, I don't know, for example, the boundaries by the Stockholm Resilience Center and other research institutes that are actively engaged in these topics. And there's so much already that there has been so much published, so much research done. So the knowledge is, like you said in the title, there. So what is truly the issue? And yes, Igor, I totally agree. We are all speaking of systemic solutions for real issues, but why aren't they happening? There is a group of 10 people right now present in this room, sitting, listening. Most of us are some kind of level aware of the problems, the solutions, the existence of perhaps other groups. So why aren't we discussing this more publicly? Where are the people? Where is the discussion taking place? For me personally, I have been in many conversations with municipalities, with mayors and so forth. And unfortunately, it's just not happening. It's just not happening. Even if you pointed out, if you give the data, if you just take people out on a walk and let them take in the state of nature currently, it just doesn't get through. So I'm I'm seriously worried because nice that it is important to have these conversations, but if we're speaking about governance on local levels, then yes, people who would be governing these communities, these commons, should have the education, should have the possibility and the capacity to self-reflect, to do some inner development, or have some kind of, I don't know, something in there and in here. Unfortunately, it's not there. It's just
It would probably be a web of governments, so not a hierarchy of governments, but a web of governments, right? Where there's in a certain way local governments that are less coupled to the global economy and global governments, such as there is today, but also for some coupling to remain there, because we cannot get rid of all the global connection we have now, right?